All right, everybody. Welcome to Talking Ball with Pat Leonard here on the Believe Network, brought to you by My Bookie, Boom Chaga Mushroom Stupor Drink, Estate 98 Coffee, and Sal Loretta for Men, Luxury Menswear and Tailoring in Midland Park, New Jersey. We are here to talk NFL draft, NFL offseason, winners and losers with Pro Bowl wide receiver Allen Robinson, 11-year veteran, back on the program. We always appreciate your insight. Rob, thanks so much for joining us, man.
I appreciate you, man. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, no doubt. So this is good timing for you coming on because obviously you produced a bunch in your career, including in Chicago, the Windy City. And that is where the story of the week in the NFL takes us. Caleb Williams, the starting quarterback of the Chicago Bears, and his father, it turns out, according to a new book, tried to circumvent being drafted by the Bears, number 1 overall last year. His father even quoted in this upcoming book from Seth Wickersham saying Chicago is the place quarterbacks go to die. A-Rob, it said in the report that they even looked into playing a year in the UFL and trying to wait a year to re-enter the draft and avoid Chicago. As a former Bear and a longtime NFL player, how do you receive this news for both from your perspective and also how you would imagine it's going to be received in Chicago?
Yeah, now those are two different things. Now, how it's going to be received in Chicago is one thing, but I don't think Chicago should entertain that too much. I think when you think about the draft process, especially being the number one overall pick, obviously, everybody's going to try to check their boxes to see what the best possible case scenario is. So do I think him playing in a different league other than the NFL was actually taken all that seriously? No, I don't. It's too many variables, too many factors, too many negative things that could come about if that was the case. Even with NIL being possible, it would make no sense for him to not just stay another year at UFC rather than going and playing in another league. So I would take that with a grain of salt if I was Chicago. Again, hearing about things throughout the course of the process. There are so many things throughout the draft process. I wasn't the number one pick myself, but I could imagine, as somebody is trying to foresee the possibilities of their career in a different directions, you have to try to check off every box just to see, what are the pros and cons of different situations. Obviously, the pros of going to Chicago checked out more than the cons, which is why he ended up staying eligible for the draft and being drafted number one overall.
Do you think this makes it a little bit more challenging on Ben Johnson, your former coordinator in Detroit? Does this make it more challenging for him to make sure the locker room is behind this player? Because I know Caleb eventually he accepted being drafted by the Bears. He talked about, I'm looking forward to turning this franchise around. But does this constant noise that's going to be around the team, does that make this kind of maiden voyage for Ben Johnson and this Bears team a little bit more challenging for them week to week?
I think that's what Ben Johnson is built for. I think Ben Johnson is built to be able to silence out that noise, be able to silence out whatever critics and pundits, are going to try to bring some of the negative energy into that locker room. I think that's why they brought Ben Johnson there, as a person who's able to protect his team and to protect his quarterback, from some of that negativity. Again, when you look back and kind of rewind, to the current situation that they're in now. I think it speaks to how excited Caleb was. When they did get Ben Johnson. We saw at Ben Johnson's press conference. Caleb Williams was in attendance. Caleb was also. We saw how excited he was during a prank call of them getting Ben Johnson. So whatever happened a year ago or however much time prior to the draft, I think things have significantly changed now. He's a Chicago Bear. He has a $13 million home in Chicago. Ben Johnson is his head coach. I think all things are trending in the right direction. And I think that everybody in Chicago should, sit back, relax a little bit, and just allow this team to ascend. Because again, they acquired some good talent in the draft. They rebuilt their O line. They have a phenomenal head coach who's an offensive minded guy. I think that things are trending in the right direction, and I think Chicago and their fans and everybody should just allow that to continue on that trajectory.
One other thing that Caleb said in that report or in that book that they mentioned was that one of the things it sounded like didn't go well with the Shane Waldron offensive coordinator situation was that Williams as a rookie was left to watch film often by himself, which obviously anybody close to the NFL knows that's absurd if he wasn't, being groomed and coached closely. and kind of shown the mistakes and told what he was doing well. You played for, and you've been in those meeting rooms with Ben Johnson. You've told us at times on this podcast about what he does well, but could you share with Bears fans and with people in the NFL now that Ben is the one sitting next to Caleb, looking at this film with him, whether it's from his rookie year or whether it's week to week here in year two, how big of an advantage now is that for him to take the next step? And what specifically can Ben do for him in your mind?
Yeah, I think Ben will help him grow a lot, especially in that aspect. I do also think that as a rookie coming in, there's a learning curve. Again, sometimes you may not have a vet or you may not have people around you to be able to tell you exactly how to do things, or there isn't a specific roadmap that everybody takes, when it comes to the maturation process for themselves in the NFL. But, as a
Mm,
player, that's a part of being a pro is you have to learn the pros and cons of how you can make yourself better, whether that's in the film room. You want to sit back in and watch things that you don't feel like you're digesting as much or as quickly as you may want to. A lot of the thing in the NFL and that makes pros is developing those habits to figure out how you yourself can get better. Again, you always aren't going to have the coach who can kind of hold your hand and lead you in the right direction. This is the National Football League. That doesn't always exist. But I
mm,
do think now that he has a coach who has coached other quarterbacks, Pro Bowl quarterbacks, all pro quarterbacks, who can then help him figure out, kind of what he needs to watch to get better, and he can kind of lean on Ben a little bit for that, but as well as, again, in this league, it's about you figuring out ways that you can get better. I think that's the number one thing, that makes guys go from good to great in this league is figuring out where you can gain an edge as an individual, because you're going to have much more time by yourself than you're going to have in the facility. So you
mm.
being able to take some of those habits from the facility, but also being able to create your own routine on how you can get better and how you can improve your game. And that's, even having outside resources, even for myself, throughout majority of the time for me in the National Football League, I've had coaches, I've had trainers, I've had people outside of the organization, that would help me constantly improve my game, whether that's watching my own personal film, seeing things that I'm doing, and helping me critique those things. But you have to kind of create that yourself, and it's a learning process. Rome wasn't built in a day. So I don't think that, Caleb uh needed to take all. It's a growing process, especially at the quarterback position.
Hmm. You played, I think, 4 years in Chicago. How tough of a market is that? Obviously, a storied franchise, high expectations, a fan base that right now is, starving for this team to be as good as it looks like they could be if they put it all together. But what was it like when you were there? Is there an intense spotlight as a player there compared to other places,
Definitely.
or did you not feel it?
Definitely. My experience was a little bit different. It was awesome, actually. When I signed there, it was an article, that's where receivers go to die. And I had some of my best years of football in Chicago. Luckily for me, my first year there, we won the division. So we kind of, we started off good. And in Chicago, I only had one losing season there. So for me, it wasn't so much negative, just a little bit, but obviously that's any market. If teams aren't winning, fans want to see them win, especially when you're in a big market like that. But at the end of the day, it's a city of champions, and I think it should be embraced. Again, it's not many teams, it's not many cities that you go to that have, two baseball teams, a basketball team, hockey, football, and that all have storied franchises, So Chicago has a warm place in my heart, and I had an amazing time playing there, and I think that, Chicago moving in the right direction, I think things will change quickly for them.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Chicago, one of the best cities in the world. I
It
absolutely
is.
love
It,
it.
it is, man. From food, from not just football wise for me. Going to Chicago. I'm from the Midwest, so being there, my family had experiences. Going there when I was growing up. So from different, festivals and different things like that. For me and my family, we had an awesome experience in Chicago.
That's awesome. No, great insight into the Bears and Caleb. That's a team that really could be maybe like the Washington Commanders of this season if they start to put it together a little bit, I guess would be the best comparison there to what they could maybe ascend to. Speaking of wide receivers, and you know, like you said, your experience in Chicago producing so well, the big wide receiver news in the NFL recently was the trade of George Pickens from the Pittsburgh Steelers to the Dallas Cowboys. Pickens with 59 catches for 900 yards and 3 touchdowns in 14 games last season. Obviously, the Steelers acquired DK Metcalf. Everybody's wondering what's the fit here? You know, what's going on? Now we see him flipped and joining CD Lamb and Dak Prescott and the boys in Dallas. Alan, I got to ask you, from a schematic football standpoint, how much does this improve Dallas? Do you see a fit here? Does it look like a clunky fit, or do you think like this really dramatically improves them right off the bat? I'm very curious about this.
I would say it, in my opinion, I think it improves them pretty dramatically. I think that George Pickens is one of those guys where he doesn't need a whole lot of volume. And I think that's something that he's shown over his career. He doesn't, for him, 6 to 7 targets in a game, the way that people throw the ball around in today's game, isn't that much volume. So you have a guy like CeeDee Lamb who can be your volume guy, but a guy like George, I remember playing in Pittsburgh with George, and George had, I want to say, maybe 200 yards or so, or almost maybe 198 off 4 or 5 catches. So that's the kind of player that they're getting. So whenever you can have a person that explosive on the other side of CeeDee Lamb, who can be able to get one-on-ones, and again, a lot of times it may be against their number 2 defender. I think this will be a very good situation for George Pickens to really be able to play well, and get some advantageous opportunities.
Having played with him as such a young guy, obviously he's a guy who's been criticized at times for effort and blocking or some things he said or attitude, that type of stuff. But I don't know him at all. I think one of the things that people have looked at from afar, the Dallas, is that Micah Parsons, very emotional player. George Pickens, very emotional player. Is this a guy who, when he joins this locker room, is this going to be a volatile situation because there's a lot of young, emotional players who are kind of still growing and you need leadership to guide them? Or does George have like a good head on his shoulders and that stuff's overblown?
Yeah, I think George is stepping into this, in a contract year, obviously, with a veteran quarterback, something that he hasn't had before. So I think for him, it's a lot on the line for this year for him, and I think he'll approach his business as such. Again, I mean, we saw a player who went for 1,000 yards a couple seasons ago. I believe he had around 900 or some yards last year and missed a couple games. So as far as the talent and him being able to produce, it's there. I think that, he has to polish some things up, off the field wise, just a little bit, but as far as the player that they're getting and what he can do, I think that he's going to a organization and a system that likes to throw the ball around. They have a quarterback, that's very high paid, who wants to throw the ball around, and now being able to bring another playmaker like him in, I think he'll fit well.
Yeah, you know what's interesting to me is, without George Pickens last season, with everyone knowing CD Lamb's getting the ball, to your point, he's still getting the volume, right? Like he's still getting open, he's still getting his targets. So it makes me think about that threat of Pickens, like just putting him on the field. Of course, Dallas's big weakness last year was kind of its inability to run the ball and to stop the run on defense. But I'm just thinking about the distraction and the element of coverage that it dictates now with George on the field, how teams aren't going to necessarily be able to double CD and give him as much attention where he was already producing. Really could be a lot of offensive production there with Brian Schottenheimer and Dak.
Definitely.
You know,
Dallas
yeah.
Dallas has to be ready to they definitely have to be ready to get their run game going. Because when I played with George Pickens in Pittsburgh, it probably the most cover 2 that I've saw. And that was predicated around George. So with him being the deep threat that he is, Again, I mean, he's going to demand attention. You can't leave a player like that, just one on one. I mean, I've saw and witnessed personal situations with him on an island, one on one with Marlon Humphreys, game on the line, 4th and 5, George Pickens, 45-yard touchdown. Cincinnati Bengals play one of the game. We run space and excellent. George Pickens, 85-yard touchdown or something like that. So I mean, as far as people having to account for him, this is not a situation where you're getting a veteran player later in his career, to kind of come in and just help out a little bit with CD Lamb. No, you're getting a very explosive player who has been probably, I would say, in the top 5 or so to top 10 every year on yards per catch. So he's a person who can stretch the field, and he stretches the field very well. And having a quarterback who knows how to get people the ball, again, I think Dallas offense can be pretty scary.
Let me ask you this, because clearly you have a high opinion of George from playing with him and seeing him up close. What do you think of the Steelers and what they did? Like, trading for DK, getting rid of George, like you said, contract year. So you're deciding, are we paying him or not? But flipping that one receiver for another. And then, of course, everybody knows it seems like they're waiting on Aaron Rodgers. But they're kind of they feel like a team in no man's land a little bit. But what do you think of them trading him out for DK and like the direction they're going in? Do you like it?
Yeah.
Are you kind of curious why they did it?
Well, for them, I think it's one of those things where on that side of the ball, um, I don't really think they had all that much experience. So when you think about if Aaron Rodgers is going to be there or not, let's say hypothetically he isn't, it's what veterans do we have on this side of the ball if we do draft a young quarterback and he's forced to play, and being able to get that they drafted a young running back who's going to get a lot of touches.
Yeah.
So for
Caleb
them,
Johnson from Iowa. Yep.
I think it was just about, we need a playmaker, obviously. In this league, the way that the game goes, you obviously have to have a playmaker. But for them, I think they needed a playmaker and also a veteran on that squad, which is why I think they end up kind of, going in that direction and then
Mm.
being able to get some value back as well with trading George, because they did have to trade a pick to get DK and pay him. So I think for them, everybody knows the Steelers are an organization who values their draft pick, so they were able to get one back
Mm.
after trading DK. So for them, I think it was a few different factors. I think that kind of being one heavily involved. It's just kind of where they stand at today.
Interesting. Yeah. If they don't have Rodgers, their quarterbacks, it's Mason Rudolph. They
Yeah.
got Will Howard, the draft pick, and then their receivers are interesting. DK Metcalf, Robert Woods, Calvin Austin the third can challenge deep, and then like you said, Caleb Johnson from Iowa, along with Kenny Gainwell and Jalen Warren. Some interesting running backs, probably a lot of touches there, like you said.
Yeah, yeah. And that's kind of how their
So
system is built a little bit, at least with Arthur Smith, kind of his history and background as far as kind of being a run first guy, being able to build around the run game, getting some play action opportunities and creating some chunk plays with DK and Calvin Austin. Also, Wilson, the guy that was hurt last year,
yeah.
who was a rookie, they're
Oh
looking for
yeah,
him
right.
to
Roman. Yep. Roman Wilson. Yep.
uh,
Yep.
they're looking for him to step up. I also think that this will be a big year for Calvin Austin. I think that he's shown a lot of flashes over the years as far as his big playmaking ability. He made some plays last year. So I think for them, they're also kind of leaning on some guys, and they do have some youth in that room already that I think that they're looking forward to kind of taking the next step, maybe getting some more opportunities. Again, I don't think Calvin Austin has really gotten the amount of volume that he may have should have gotten over the past couple of years. So him getting more opportunities and playing a bigger role into things this year, I think also may have been a factor.
And there's that veteran fit, like you said, young, otherwise young room, Austin, Wilson. So you
Yeah.
add DK, who's more of a vet rather than
Yeah. And
George,
then
who's
you
very
add
talented, but
and
it's
then you
all
add
youth.
Robert Woods also after that, to just kind of, put some finishing touches when it comes to, veterans on offense, but again bringing in
Makes
a
sense.
young running back. So, I think they're, and again, man, they have Coach T. So, when you have Mike Tomlin, everything may not, look the prettiest going into the year, but one thing that I do know about Coach T in the city of Pittsburgh is he knows how to get the job done.
No doubt, no doubt. All right, shifting gears to a topic that I'm I'm dying to get everyone's opinion and hear everyone's take on is going back to the NFL draft. And obviously, this is going to be just a talking point for as long as this young man is in the league. Shedeur Sanders sliding the Colorado quarterback, the son of primetime Deion Sanders, all the way to the 5th round, pick 144. And not only sliding that far, but being the second quarterback selected by the Cleveland Browns in this draft. They take Dillon Gabriel from Oregon and then come back and end up taking Shedeur Sanders. And so now their quarterback room is very interesting, right? You got Kenny Pickett in there. You got Deshaun Watson technically still on the roster. You got Joe Flacco, Shedeur Sanders, Dillon Gabriel. So let's unpack this. First, A-Rob, tell me what was going through your mind and just your initial reactions to Sanders sliding as far as he did.
I was very surprised. I didn't know if he would go in the first round or not. As we got closer to the draft, you started hearing rumblings as far as who possibly would kind of go in the first round when it came to the quarterbacks after Cam Ward, which kind of helped. But then also, I don't think anybody expected that. But at the same time, I tell a lot of people, as you're going through the draft process, it's like dating before somebody gets married. You're figuring out different things, pros and cons, red flags to how do I want to go about this working relationship? Is this a person that fits my culture and my work environment? So, there's so many factors, other than just the tape itself, and I think that, from hearing and talking to some people, when you break down the film as well, some people are higher on some things than other. One thing that I noticed going into the draft was from watching some of Shadeur's film was, he played a lot out of the gun, which I don't think was an issue for him per se, but looking at the teams and who needed the quarterbacks and where they were drafting at, I thought the best fit for him early on would be a team that played in the gun. I don't think a team would have drafted him in the first round and then asked him to play under center, all that well, which is why I thought, possibly the Giants being a good fit, a team that likes to play out of the gun and has a very good gun scheme, that's a scheme that may fit him very well, as opposed to, again, we heard rumblings of possible Pittsburgh and different things like that, but Pittsburgh is a little bit different. They operate a little bit more under center than most teams, so when you're just factoring some of those things in, as far as just at the quarterback position, it made it very open to, where he might go after the first round, but seeing him drop to the 5th round, I never would have predicted that. And I was very surprised, on top of being surprised to see Cleveland draft him after they already drafted a quarterback, I believe, in the 3rd round, and it's very interesting, Cleveland spending 3 draft picks this year on quarterbacks, trading for Kenny Pickett from Philadelphia, and then also drafting 2 quarterbacks, so when you break down their quarterback situation, they used 3 draft picks this year on quarterbacks.
Highly, highly unusual situation. There's no doubt about it. And yeah, there were people with the Giants, to your point, who really liked him. And Dable really warmed to Jackson Dart. And then that kind of steered the process kind of from January to that selection. But they were having conversations, Alan, the week of the draft with primary people in their building still liking Shedeur.
So
And
from
so,
so from your opinion, how do you think somebody goes from, or how do you think a player goes from possibly going? What did the Giants draft? Dart that was
three.
it 21?
Oh,
It
yeah,
was
25. They traded up to 25
25.
to take him, yeah.
So how do you think a player goes from possibly being drafted at 25 to then in the 5th round, whatever pick that was? And I say that
Yeah.
because I think that's such a, when you have a team like the Giants who are still in discussions on who they want to take a week or so before the draft, which possibly could be this person who then goes in the 5th round. It's very interesting to me as far as how the process goes. But again, at the same
Yeah.
time, I think that it's a lot of scheme fit to me.
Yeah, I think you hit on that there is a football element to it. There's also the For sure, to your point, there were certain slots and certain teams who were obvious quarterback spots in the first couple rounds. And other than them, the teams that ended up taking these late round flyers on quarterbacks, the Browns got, what needed one, but you had the Philadelphia Eagles drafted one late, the Steelers drafted one late, but there were only a handful of teams who were very obvious going to get a QB early. And so there was an element of once he slips past, a couple of the obvious QB teams who get one, like the Giants with Dart and the Saints with Tyler Shuck, obviously the Titans drafting Ward number 1 overall. There was a lot of falling past teams who just weren't even considering QBs at all. But to your point, you think about it, if a quarterback's good enough, the premium to the position is so high, even a team that doesn't quote unquote need one is going to take a guy if he's the best player on the board and he's a first round grade on a lot of people's boards and he's available in the third. So falling to the fifth, to me, Alan, that to me was about off-field stuff. And it
Yeah.
wasn't about him getting in trouble off the field. It was about him being overly cocky in meetings. It was about him telling teams like, you're not interviewing me, I'm interviewing you. It was about him saying, like, if you don't want to change your culture, don't come get me. He wasn't humble enough for some of these teams. I think for the Giants, even the debate was how. Now, let me clarify this. When you talk to people who scout him closely, they tell you, like, this is one thing one team said, that once he walks between the lines and he's in practice and he's working on football, he's coachable, he works hard, he cares, like no questions about the football element of it. It was just, hey, sometimes he's going to say some stuff that's going to get him in trouble or put the wrong light on the organization. And like some teams, like the Giants, there were people having a debate of, all right, is this our face of franchise QB, right? Is everything about what we've seen from him, including, as you heard, the leak out of the Giants building, that the first meeting between him and Dable, that he was kind of challenging Dable, didn't like the way the Giants were handling the meeting. The Giants felt like, this is us running the meeting, not you, so there's a tug of war. Some of this is generational too, Alan, right? Like Shedeur is not the only quarterback or prospect who's been cocky and taken more of a hand in trying to control his destiny or fate, right?
Yeah.
Like Baker Mayfield came out of college cocky and got drafted number 1 overall. So that's
And
why
it's
I think,
levels, it's levels, and I say
yeah,
that because, when you think about that, even, Baker was a Heisman Trophy winner, and I think that for even guys moving forward, I think it goes to show how important the process is once college is over to then the entire lead up to the draft, from going to the Senior Bowl or East West Shrine game, and then going to the combine, and then having your workouts and having top 30 visits. Those instances are very important for most guys. If you take a person like Travis Hunter, that may be that's a lot less important for a guy like that. Abdullah Carter, a lot less important for a guy like that. Again, but if we would be remiss to sit here and act like other factors don't play where players go into being drafted. Laramie Tunzel had a video that was dropped on him on draft day, and people, believe that his stock slid a little bit just from that, and that was a draft day event. So
100%.
when when you look at it, the process, and as a person who's gone through the process, this is a process where it is to be taken seriously, and I say being taken seriously because it may not be a normal job interview, but at the end of the day, you are interviewing with teams and people are getting a feel for you. For example, when I got to Pittsburgh, I remember going before the playoff game in Buffalo. Coach T was kind of joking with me, saying, "Wow, man, like this is the same player and person that I went to go see at the pro day at Penn State." And
Wow.
a part of me being in Pittsburgh was, I believe Omar Khan was still was in the front office then. Coach T remember meeting with me. I had positive reviews as far as my career prior to me getting to Pittsburgh, but everybody remembered those meetings. Even when I was my short time with the Giants, Coach Groh, he was a person who remembered, some of the meetings that we had and me meeting with him, in the draft process. So
Wow.
those things stick with guys, throughout the duration of your career, and that's the first impression for a lot of people. And that sometimes is the only impression that people get before they're able maybe to get you in the building again far longer down the lines, So it's a fraternity, it's a business. And again, like they say, man, the eye in the sky is always watching because things are filmed and recorded and everything like that. So it's a lot more that goes into it in just the X's and O's, especially when you're talking about heavily guaranteed contracts, which the first round guys get.
No, that's an excellent point by you about taking that process seriously and recognizing it is a job interview. And it also, to your point, is a first impression and maybe your only impression. So you have to remember that. It's like if you don't care how you come off, then you don't care how you come off, but that's how you're going to come off to them. And I think bottom line, Alan, is like some people were scared to say it, and you don't want to bury a prospect during the process, when you hear certain things. But I think the bottom line is he didn't handle the process well. And the other thing, though, I will say is closer to the draft, I had conversations with people about some of this off field stuff. And especially after his pro day, there were people saying, listen, there's some people who like him as a person. There's some people who he's not their style. But there's a lot of people concerned with when he's at his pro day, his deep out throws were wobbly and didn't look strong. And so, there was an element of, like, to your point of, like, how did he slide to the fifth and not just the second? Yeah, he didn't handle the process well. There were teams, even though the Giants liked him, there were teams that were like, we don't think his arm's that good on these NFL throws. He hasn't shown us enough physically,
Yeah.
So,
And
and you're,
again,
yeah, yeah.
very similar to when you have guys who are combine warriors who go kill the combine, and then people go back and watch their film again. And you see guys climb up draft boards that way, the same way that when you may not have the best impressions or great workouts or whatever the case may be, people go back and nitpick your film. It's the same thing. We see guys all the time who may run a 4.240 or something like that, or outside linebacker who goes high because he has a very good vertical, very good 40 time, super explosive in the broad jump. Now some scouts say, you know what, let me go back and rewatch this film and see what did I miss, and kind of what could this player possibly be, and are we missing something? The same way that, to the contrary of that, if you see people who may not perform their best at the combine or may not have the greatest of interviews or so on and so forth, then people say, you know what, is this guy really who we think he is? Let's go back and watch this film. And now you get people nitpicking because, again, it's so much time between when the college football season ends and the draft that people go back and watch tape to nitpick. People go back to watch tape to try to confirm. It's so much time for people, and sometimes it's too much idle time. And again, I mean, Shedeur's on the Cleveland Browns, so I think everybody's excited to sit back and watch and to see how he develops.
I don't envy Kevin Stefanski though, because there's like imagine if you lined up all those quarterbacks in the scenarios. It just it's not one of those things where if you do enough research on it, the right answer is going to jump out at you. It
Yep.
just feels like no matter what choice you make, there will be some good and there will be second guessing of it. No
Definitely,
matter
definitely.
if he plays over Gabriel, it's like, why the heck did they draft Gabriel? If Gabriel plays, it's like, why is Shedeur even on the roster? If Pickett plays and plays a lot and neither rookie goes in, it's like, what the heck are we doing? Right. It's
Yeah.
door one, door two, door three. They all feel like landmines to me for
Yeah.
Stefanski. It isn't going to be boring though, Alan. Like, I'll tell you that in
Listen,
Cleveland.
I know nobody in the NFL has Hard Knocks this year, but if it was a year that it would be very interesting and entertaining, I would say Cleveland Browns Hard Knocks. I don't know if they could circle back or if it's too late or not, but it's going to be very interesting. And again, I think the number one thing that makes it, even more interesting is we know how limited reps are, so trying to be able to evaluate those four guys who all have a little bit different styles and how they can kind of bring their own niche into the offense. I'm very curious to see how that plays out.
No doubt. All right, shifting gears quickly to a couple New York Giants questions, and then we'll talk a little bit winners of the offseason and get out of here. Thank you so much. Your time is valuable. I know, Alan. We are brought to you, everybody, reminder by MyBookie, Boom Chaga Mushroom Super Drink, Estate 98 Coffee, and Salaretta for Men in Midland Park, New Jersey. Alan, this actually just came up this week. The Giants had Gabe Davis in for a visit. Now he tore his meniscus in week 11 for the Jags. The Jags release him. Wide receiver, obviously, former Buffalo Bill, had 4 touchdowns in a playoff game against the Kansas City Chiefs, unforgettably. So Dable and Shane have a relationship with him. I don't know where he stands physically, like how ready he would be. But what I wanted to pose to you, because we've had conversations about the Giants offense, you know Dable's offense well. Would you agree that if they were to sign Gabe Davis and he were healthy, that this could maybe help unlock the offense by having Slayton on one side, Gabe Davis on the other side outside, and then move Malik Neighbors to the slot where Neighbors would operate inside and be kind of that primary target in the middle of the field for Dable?
I'll say this: that scenario that you propose leave 2 guys left out, Wan'Dale Robinson and Jalen Hyatt. So for me, with that being said, I would have to say, if I was them, I don't know if I would go that route. Again, I think you have 2 young players, and I think for them, something that they missed last year was being able to create those explosives down the field. And I think that um, style of play, as far as what Gabe kind of did in Buffalo, he was a pretty low volume guy, some big targets, made a lot of plays on scrambles with Josh Allen, caught a decent amount of post and go balls and things like that. I feel like you have to try to figure out where Jalen Hyatt can kind of fit into that role. I know Gabe Davis will have some familiarity, but coming off an injury, I'm not sure how old he is, but having some younger legs, for me, if I was the Giants right now, rather than bringing in another receiver, I would really try to figure out, how do we unlock and untap Jalen Hyatt's possible potential. And again, they may not be able to untap his full potential in one season, but seeing what he did as a rookie, to be able to be effective on low volume, I think that's something that they need. They need a guy who can maybe have 60 or so yards in a game off of 3 catches, or, be able to catch a deep ball and have a guy who has a game like 2 catches, 55 yards, and from a situational standpoint, that will be 2 catches around 20 plus yards, that's a fifth of the field, so if they're able to get that out of somebody that's already on their roster, that they don't have to pay any more, because again, I mean, we know that vets come with somewhat of a price tag. They will be being paid more than Jalen Hyatt is, but having
Yeah.
Jalen Hyatt sitting on your roster and seeing what he did as a rookie, even if he has that same stat line that he had his rookie year, this year, I think it will be very effective to the offense by them being able to create some packages where Jalen Hyatt's on the outside and Slayton's on the outside with Neighbors inside. So I think you still can kind of get those things with the current way that their receiver room sits. And I mean, I would be excited. That I may be a bit biased. As far as them trying to get Jalen Hyatt involved, but if that was me, that would be the route that I would go.
No, I don't hate getting Hyatt more involved. I don't disagree with that. I do think Wandale sometimes is overmatched inside. I think he can make plays, but I think they have to use him more creatively. I'm not sure he's their every down slot, or should be. But on Hyatt's point, I think a couple things. One, I more kind of said, I would love to see this new alignment, because the Giants didn't show faith in Jalin last year,
Yeah, I
despite
agree.
those playmaking as a rookie. I do know, like, one takeaway I had was, I think Daniel Jones' reluctance to push it down the field, which of course was partially due to poor protection, but also, not taking those chances sometimes when they were there. I think there was less of a rapport with Hyatt and Daniel, even though they did make some plays the year before. But then, like when Tyrod was there, Hyatt and Tyrod had kind of a connection. They played a lot together in camp, those types of things. And I don't think he had that with Jones. So maybe it was like Jones was more comfortable with other guys, but the organization just didn't show any confidence in Hyatt,
Yeah,
in, behind the
yeah.
scenes, publicly, anything. So I would love to see it from him. Um, and I mean, that's a good point by you. Kind of like give him another chance before you go and get a
And
guy.
it's still early, at least be able to see it out through the OTA process, through mandatory mini camp, being able to give him, another off-season program, if you will, to see if that can improve a little bit more. Now he has new quarterbacks as well. Russell Wilson is a guy who likes to push it down the field in some of the play action game, which he showed throughout his career. And Jameis always loves to push it down the field. So having Jalin right now on your roster, I think that they could maybe sit tight a little bit to just kind of see how that plays out. He's a young, explosive receiver, and not so many teams, just have those guys just sitting around, So and I agree with you as well. Being able to get neighbors inside a little bit more, I think will help a lot. Again, I think it will help just from teams not being able to identify all the time where Malik will be at. I think that will be significant. And also Darius Slayton, is a guy who can also be intertwined inside and outside. So I think they have a lot of flexibility on being able to on certain scenarios that may cause for having a bigger slot. I think they have both of those guys on the roster. And I think that they also have another outside guy in Jalin that can help them stretch the field. So again, that's what I would like to see. But I mean, Gabe Davis is a good player. He's a really good player. So we'll see.
Speaking of the Giants as well, you, a former star at Penn State, the Giants select Abdul Carter, edge rusher out of Penn State. Of course, had played off ball first couple years for the Nittany Lions, and then ended up putting his hand down and starring on the edge. Lost to my Irish at the end, unfortunately. But
Tough game.
yeah, tough game, great game. But this is a player, Alan, who a lot of teams had as like the primary, forget the quarterback position because that's the premium, whatever. But this guy was the top prospect on a lot of teams' boards, just graded what he was, what he could be at a premium position as well. What do you know about Carter? What can you say about him? And what do you think of this pick and fit with the Giants coming from your alma mater?
I think it's a great pick and fit. I think that historically, the Giants have a great culture when it comes to pass rushers. But I also think that his experience playing off the ball helps a lot as well. His versatility, his athleticism. He's a guy who can be a true outside linebacker who you need to rush, who you need to drop. I think he's very comfortable in both of those by being able to have the experience of playing off the ball and also rushing the passer. So I think for them, they get a guy who's in the box, who can play, again, hand down, standing up, rushing, coverage. I think he's very versatile for him. And I think when you add speed and athleticism like that to your front seven, along with Dexter Lawrence and some of those other guys, I think that you really are creating a front that teams are going to have to deal with.
Yeah, no doubt. It could be exciting. If the Giants can score some points offensively, they could really get after the quarterback if those guys can pin
Definitely.
their ears back and not just have to defend the run when you're down 10. It's so different in
Exactly.
game situations,
Exactly.
right?
And again, that's how football is. Again, most defenses in an ideal world are built to rush and cover. When you have guys having to play the entire playbook every single snap, it makes it very difficult for your premier pass rushers to then pin their ears back because again, you have
Mm.
teams lined up in two tight end sets now. They're doubling up to the linebacker in some outside zone schemes and different things like that. So when you can just have some 3-by-1 concepts, 2-by-2 concepts, open formations where tight ends aren't attached in premier pass rush situations. I think that you put yourself in a very advantageous situation, especially adding some pieces to the secondary as well.
No doubt, no doubt. It's going to be a more there's a lot of excitement. It's going to be an interesting year, even just here now in the offseason. New quarterback room, new talent added, pressure to win, tough schedule. And that
Yeah.
brings me to some talk in general here about like winners of the offseason, primary takeaways. We have the draft, we have the schedule. Definitely want to ask you about whether it's a schedule that you highlighted that interests you, whether it's a draft that a team had that you think really won. Is there a team that you feel got a lot better? I know I could kick it off by saying three teams I really like that have had their offseason so far is I love that the Rams got the Falcons first round pick next year. I love that the Browns got Jacksonville's first round pick next year in that trade with Travis Hunter coming up. And I also like the Houston Texans adding a bunch. They had 9 picks. They ended up with trading all over the board in the draft. They got it. Jaden Higgins from Iowa State, a touchdown machine at wide receiver. So they add some more weapons
And they added
Uh,
his partner from college as well.
yeah, that's right.
Uh,
That's right.
yeah, I forget his name, but for me, it was Houston Texans. I thought they had a phenomenal draft. I think that they already have a kind of a culture established, when it comes to an offensive culture and just kind of where they're at. A team that's played well over the last couple years now. So being able to add some young pieces, I think that that's the position that they're in. Like Nico Collins is now the alpha of that room, and it's kind of his show. So being able to add some pieces around him, along with having a very good defensive coach, I think that they're definitely ascending and had a good draft. I thought the Giants as well, being able to add the pieces that they added in free agency, along with, I'm adding Abdullah Carter, again, and having those
Mm,
guys, still ascend, adding some veteran quarterbacks to the room. And then also to me, the team that had, I probably would say the best draft, in my opinion, would be the Bears. You know, well, draft and off season, trading and getting some pieces on the offensive line. Ben Johnson is a big trenches guy. Like he's all about the trenches and dominating in the trenches. So them being able to start there in free agency, but then also polishing up some of their skill positions by drafting the tight end from Michigan, by drafting Burton from Missouri, being able to add pieces like that
mm.
to your team. And again, when you already have a vet like Cole Kmet, when you already have DJ Moore, Romo Dunze, you already have those guys. So you aren't asking some of the young players where you need to come in right now and do certain things. You can kind of build and get creative with how you kind of implement them into the mix and allow your workhorses to be workhorses and allow those guys to grow and develop at the same time.
No, that's a good point on Chicago. They are really intriguing. They add, as you said, Joe Tooney, Drew Dahlman, Jonah Jackson on the interior, solidify that interior. They get Luther Burden at wide receiver, Colston Loveland, as you said, at tight end. They're an interesting team, Alan, for me too. When I look at that offense, the one thing that's missing now, you know, DeAndre Swift's a good player. Don't get me wrong. But you look at like the Jahmyr Gibbs that Ben Johnson rode and with Montgomery as well as that 1-2 punch. And that they're like there's speed there, but it's also physical, heavy running style. And I wonder if like a Nick Chubb is a fit for them, as like a late off season signing or something like that, because I do think Caleb Williams, if you're trying to get him to stop holding the ball and to feel more comfortable and to play action, I think what you're looking for maybe is a power running game to really lean on heavily. And I don't see that in their running back room yet. So I'm wondering if there's still an addition coming there.
Possibly, possibly. I
Yeah.
think that something that helps Ben Johnson is the familiarity of him having a DeAndre Swift. So him kind of knowing the protections, has
Right.
playing with Ben Johnson prior. But I do think that they may have a possible late ad coming. Again, also we have to remember, when Ben Johnson over in Detroit, I believe that the running backs were Jamal Williams and also DeAndre Swift, and they had a good running
Right.
game there. So I think Ben Johnson, he has very good experience on being able to kind of mix and match guys, and being able to get the best out of them in the run game. They then as time progressed, been able to get the luxury to have a Jahmyr Gibbs and a David Montgomery. But as far as the first year, I think Ben Johnson is one of those guys who, I think he wants to see what he has. I think he wants to kind of build off and kind of add to the chef's kitchen. I think he has his seasonings and his mixes right now, and I think he's going to figure out what's missing. And I think he'll go get it and kind of adapt that way.
No doubt. No, it's been an exciting offseason so far. And it hasn't just been all football, Alan. I was checking on your YouTube channel, the handle there, everybody at Alan Robinson 313. I saw you attending and kind of taking us along on the ride with you as fans and as viewers. I believe it was Pistons Knicks early NBA playoffs, right?
Yeah, Pistons Knicks. Yeah.
What was that like? What was that experience like? What did you think of the Knicks up close? And what do you got going on? You're getting back into a little bit more of the content creation that we've seen from you over the years.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely doing some content creating, also still training. Again for me, it was a couple injuries that I was still, that were nagging me a bit that I was getting, worked out, before I kind of started ramping up my training, so I've been doing that as well, but it was awesome to be back in Detroit. Again, man, with us winning our division in Detroit, To then the Tigers, they made the playoffs last year. The Pistons are doing well. You know, the Detroit Tigers right now have the best record in baseball. At least they did yesterday or the day before. You know, so seeing some of the teams in the city play well, man, I had to go check the Detroit Pistons out in the playoffs. You know, again this year was their first playoff win. Since like '06 or '08. You know, but it was a great series, great game. Jalen Brunson is a problem. Um, he's the to me he's the best second level player right now in the playoffs. He can get a basket at any spot on the court, you know. And I think that he presents so many issues in that kind of intermediate range. Like he can shoot the three, but from floaters, step backs, fadeaways, post games, everything that he presents in that second level was just a little bit too much for Detroit.
As we sit here right now, we got the Pacers and the T-Wolves have already advanced to their respective conference finals. And we got Denver OKC is going to a game 7 in OKC. And then this evening, as we speak, the Knicks are trying to close out the Celtics without Jason Tatum. It's 3-2 there going into game 6. I set that up to ask you, who do you think is going to take the ship when it's all said and done here in the NBA? Because I got to be honest, Alan, like after the first round, the Cavs to me looked like I was thinking they're deep, they're
Yep.
long, they can defend. Donovan
Yep.
Mitchell is unstoppable. And then
Yep.
the Pacers just wiped them out. So now I don't know what to think.
Yeah, you know, listen, for all my betting fans out there, I would say if you're betting, bet against the teams that go game 7 in the next series. So, I mean, we're gonna see if that holds true. You know, Golden State just got knocked out. But I mean, Denver is, you know, they're taking Oklahoma City to a game 7. So we'll see. And I think it's so much about matchups. You know, I think that Denver was a team that matched up very well against Oklahoma City. But I do think if Oklahoma City, my only issue is that now they're in a game 7, you know, so I have to take Minnesota. I have to take Minnesota winning the next round versus either of these teams. Denver
Mm.
coming off a previous game 7, so I mean I don't think they'll win just off that. But if they some reason they do, coming off of back to back 7 game series, I have to take Minnesota advancing to the finals. And then I'm curious to see where this series plays out. If it goes 7 with Boston and the Knicks, then I think it may be Minnesota versus Pacers.
Yeah. The Pacers right now, I mean, I
They're
don't think
playing
they've
so
seen it.
confident.
Whew.
They're playing confident.
Miles Turner is something else, man.
Yep, yep, yep.
If I could come back as a basketball player in my next life, I might want to be built like that, shooting threes, right? Catch and shoot. It's like it gone before it even touches my hand.
Yep,
Love that. Love him as a
yep.
player.
And they're such a
Uh,
confident team right now. Also, Rick Carlisle is a heck of a coach. You know, I think that's something that people haven't factored in as much. At least I didn't going into the playoffs. Just his overall playoff experience and overall coaching experience, and I think that's been put on display as well. Because Indiana's a good team, but just situationally, how well they're playing, their sets, the ball movement, defending, even them playing Cleveland throughout the series in almost like a full court kind of pressure situation. It may have been token pressure, but you know, the way that they've been defending and stuff, they've been really ready and prepared for this playoff run that they're on.
no doubt. I can't watch the NBA night in, night out during the regular season, but once
Yeah.
the playoffs start, I'm
Same.
all
Me
in. You
too.
know what I mean?
Me too.
And it's great theater. Can't wait to see how it shakes out. This has been an awesome conversation. Again, reminder everybody, we're brought to you by MyBookie, Boom Chaga Mushroom Super Drink, Estate 98 Coffee, and Sal Loretta for Men. This has been Talking Ball with Pat Leonard. Allen Robinson, thank you so much for joining us, man. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you having me, man, as always.